Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of What Israel Is. Um, I originally intended to do this episode about the entirety of the second half of the 40s, so 45 up to 49, but I think there's just too much to cram into one episode, so I'll again divide it so that this will be about the era of 45 post-war up to 47, and then I'll do another episode about the Israeli War of Independence and what followed, including the dispossession of Palestinians, etc., etc. So, following the Second World War, the Labour Party, the UK Labour Party, wins the elections over in Britain, and despite having previously promised to support the notion of a Jewish state within the land of Palestine, the former policies remain unchanged, including the white paper still being enforced. The white paper being Donald White Paper, which limits Jewish immigration and essentially lays out the plan for a shared government, which essentially has greater representation of Arabs because they have proportionately more numbers. So that, and also the British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin proclaims that Britain should support the Arabs of Palestine, and that the survivors of the genocide in Europe have no connection to the land. Following this, all three organizations, the Jewish organizations, being the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi, create a unified front and declare war on the mandatory government, with the end objective of removing British rule from the land. Doing so by creating a financial burden on the UK government and making the remaining here a losing effort. So what happens is that Harry Truman, as well as the Anglo-American Committee, demand that the British authorities allow 100,000 of the European Jewish refugees to immigrate to Mandatory Palestine after the war. The Brits either and later flat out refuse. In the meantime, the various Jewish organizations carry on the fighting and smuggling of European Jews into Mandatory Palestine. The Jewish organizations carry out several operations intended to hamper the British authorities. These include the destruction of railways and locomotives, scuttling of patrol boats intended for apprehending illegal immigrants, attacks on police outposts, destructions of bridges connecting Mandatory Palestine to its neighbors, detonation of radars which helped in intercepting immigrants, The majority of these operations were well received by the Jewish public. The British authorities' hardline stance with regards to the immigration, as well as their poor handling of this insurgency, including in particular, in one particular instance, firing at unarmed men, brought voices also in the States to call for the immediate removal of British rule. Following all of these operations, the Brits carry out a huge operation. This is known by the Jews as the Black Saturday, Black Sabbath, if you'd like, and by the Brits as Operation Agatha. The Brits essentially impose a curfew on several of the biggest Jewish cities, and also Jerusalem and Haifa, which have both Jews and Arabs living in them, and apprehend a large number of Jewish community leaders, including some who were active within these underground organizations. This is met with a horrible retaliation by the Irgun, but this is despite the fact that after the fact, the blame is laid at the Irgun's feet. This was planned by all of the organizations together. So the Haganah, despite what would later happen, does not get scot-free. The Irgun retaliates with a devastating terrorist attack on the King David Hotel. Now, this hotel serves the usual function of a hotel, but also it is the headquarters of the mandatory government in Palestine. The Irgun infiltrates the hotel and plants explosives at the foundations of the hotel. The Irgun later claims that to have notified the hotel reception of the pending explosion by phone, also having called, I believe, the British or some other embassy and a newspaper. But whether this actually happened or not is unknown to us and will remain a mystery. What happened is, by British reckoning, about 91 people died, many of which were unrelated civilians. Following this horrid attack, the Haganah leaves the unified insurgency and commits itself solely to the efforts of smuggling immigrants, while the Irgun and the Lehi continue in their armed campaign against the British. And this includes attacks on police stations and bases, and abduction and murder of officials, and the like. Following all of this, and this is the beginning of 47 already, the British Foreign Minister Ernest Bevin, whom I mentioned earlier, renounces British control of Mandatory Palestine, effectively ceding control to the UN. The transition is not immediate, and in the meantime, the fighting ensues. The SS Exodus, on board of which were 4,500 Jewish refugees, arrives. The British detain it rather, struggling with the passengers, leading to 3 deaths of Jewish refugees. The ship is forcibly returned to Germany. The passengers sent back to the refugee camps therein. The special UN committee tasked with Palestine publishes the partition plan, according to which the land will be split evenly, for the purposes of the formation of a Jewish and Arab states. Land, I said kinda because It's like about 50-50, really. But the majority of arable good land is given essentially for the Arab state, and well, this is the way it's partitioned. The Negev Desert, the central and northern coastlines, and the eastern Galilee are given for the purpose of the foundation of a Jewish state. The Gaza Strip, half of the border with Egypt, the center of the land, the entirety of the center of the land, and the western Galilee for the Arabs. Jerusalem remains under international control, but it is deeply entrenched within Arab land, so the question of what happened, like how Jewish people from the Jewish state could access it, remains unsolved. The Arab leadership refuses. The Jewish leadership tentatively accepts, and conflict immediately ensues. And this is the beginning of what is known as Palestine Civil War, or the Israeli War of Independence. This is it for today. Hopefully next week I'll finish up with the 40s, and I'll see you guys next week, hopefully. Till then, have an awesome weekend.